Welcome to another episode of SantorSnakes. On this episode, we're going to do a summary of everything it took to build this custom background and bioactive substrate.
Thank you to all that liked and subscribed.
Now, cue that intro. So the first thing we're going to start off with is basically just a list of everything that we used to create this.
So whenever you're making the background, protect the area around it and wear clothes that you don't care about and wear gloves.
Very true. Better to be prepared for anything that may go wrong. We used great stuff, pond and stone.
And we like the green can because it is safe for animals and it can get wet.
Right, and it's black versus the standard yellow.
Yeah.
So it just kind of blends in better. If you do end up missing any pieces, it just kind of hides into the shadows rather than being a bright yellow eyesore.
Yeah, and it kind of looks natural.
Exactly. For branches and perches and things like that, we used a bunch of cork bark. You can, of course, use branches and leaves from outside.
If you get leaves from outside, you should bake them to get all the crumbs off.
Very true.
And whenever you put the expanding foam in, make sure it is dry and expanded whenever you go on to the next thing.
Good. And this is the step where you're going to want to trim anything off. If you want it to have a flatter look or there's expanded into areas that you don't want it to be in, this is where you take a knife and you cut those areas off. After the foam is fully expanded and dry, it's time to move on to the silicone. So we used 3 full tubes of the clear silicone.
And we used a caulking gun to squirt it in the balls.
That's right, you're going to need one of those too. We thinned the silicone out with some mineral spirits. It didn't take much of the odorless mineral spirits, but you definitely want to thin it out so that it spreads easier.
The odorless mineral spirits is not actually odorless.
True.
It's
It's kind of stinky. We took just a little paper bowl and a straw and mixed it right in there. Super simple.
Then we used a paintbrush to paint it on. Make sure to get it everywhere except for on the bulk, but you can get a little on the bulk if you want it to be kind of dirty.
At this point, you want to use your favorite substrate to cover up the silicone. If you've got thicker areas of silicone, it'll actually hold more substrate, get you some good little texture and things, but you're going to want to let that fully dry when it's completely covered.
And whenever you put the silicone on, before you put the dirt in, if it's kind of shiny and looks wet, that means it's good and you can move on.
Excellent. Some of the features that we added to the tank is a Repta Rapids waterfall from ZooMed, and we just used a large rectangular flower bucket upside down to kind of raise it off the ground, and then just a standard black round flower bucket cut in half as the ground level hide. We went to our favorite reptile stores and our favorite hobby stores and got lots of different vines and fake plants to put all over the place. Some of our favorite ones up here we ended up cutting apart and turning it into more of like a draping vine curtain just for some security.
Yeah. And some leaves fell off the fake plant, so we used some silicone to stick it in some bulk, looking like it's growing some.
Yeah, I think it looks really good. And the water bowl on the ground level is definitely good for drinking and also adding humidity. So the next step was creating the actual bioactive substrate. We started off with a thin layer of hydrogrown, just as a little drainage layer, and then we did a mixture of substrates with some water added to it to make it nice and sticky.
Moist.
I don't want to say that either.
We added 3 real planks, isopods, and springtails.
And then you've got a fully bioactive substrate.
And we used maple and live oak to get the isopods a little hiding place.
Once the bioactive substrate is in with your live plants and isopods and springtails, you want to give the tank time to mature. You want to give those plants time to root themselves, give those isopods a chance to root around and start establishing their little colony before you add your snake. It needs to have a chance to develop before that snake gets in there and starts trampling on things. So in the next part, I am going to be kind of narrating a sped up version of us actually completing all of the steps in order to create this. And a full list of everything that we used will be down in the descriptions for you. Hope you enjoy. So we started with kind of doing a dry fit of some of our big pieces. We wanted to make sure that we fill in gaps with spray foam so the whiz doesn't get stuck in there. But we wanted to place some branches, place some perches in different spots around the new enclosure just to make sure that we're giving him a good variety of temperatures when he's in different spots. Flipping the cage on its back, we're wearing our gloves, shaking up the spray foam, and going at it. Filling in the area behind the waterfall first, just to make sure that that's nice and level. And then we start placing some little shelves and getting things laid in there. Of course, make a little mess. Be very careful where you're putting this stuff. We've got, again, it mapped out on the raised area, holes cut in it, a little bit of spray foam for some security, and then we start sticking some pieces on there. We want to make sure that it stays in place even though the foam is going to be expanding. So in order to do that, we've got to make sure it's got a little weight on it. Then we start putting in some more shelving, some more little perches for him, and then we've got silicone on that ring that's going to be stuck to the glass. We want to make sure that we can get the things out when it's time to clean the waterfall feature. So we've got to make sure that it has accessibility to get out. Well, there we go. I had to move that stick over, so it's very good to check that often. This little fork trick did not work. It just got too sticky. Little pieces of cork bark all around the background. Just give it a little extra flair, something interesting to look at, and some really good places to silicone on little tiny sapling, fake plants and things. Believe it or not, we ran out of gloves working with all that spray foam. We moved on to the silicone. It's super thick, so we want to thin it out with a little bit of mineral spirits. It needs to be thick enough to where it'll hold the substrate that you're applying to it, but you want it thin enough to where it'll be paintable. So we're just using a straw, stirring it up nice and neat, and then we're going to start with that raised flower bed for the waterfall. Just getting a nice even coat on all of it, on the ends of each of the pieces, and then putting some substrate on there. We've got our own little custom mix, getting it on there nice and thick, and then you want to pat it down a little bit just to get some extra really stuck in there. And if there's any gaps, of course, you can go back with a little more silicone and get it in there, but it's much easier the first go round, trust us. After that, we just start moving on to the main background. We're working in small areas, doing a really, really good job of making sure that that silicone mixture is in all of those little nooks and crannies. Again, it's easier to get it done the first time than to have to come back and fill in lots of little gaps. So just take your time with this. It really does take some time. We used several small batches of the silicone and mineral spirit mix to get the job done. You can end up with a little bit of silicone on the glass, and actually that's okay. If that happens, you just get a little bit of pure mineral spirits and just rub, and it'll come off that glass and it'll be crystal clear just like you want. Obviously, when you stand up the enclosure, some of that is going to fall down, but that's okay. It'll be at the bottom and you can just dry scoop it up, or you can even leave it as some of your substrate layer. No big deal either way. You're going to want to look at the tank from all different angles, from the left side, right side, top, front, and make sure that you get all of that black spray foam covered with the silicone and then the substrate. Then we move on to the actual substrate layer for the tank, adding a little drainage layer at the bottom, spreading it out nice and even, and then terra firma mixed with forest floor and some live oak leaves and maple leaves. We're saving some of those leaves for later, and now we're adding the water into the big bucket and stirring it up, having fun. When it's all mixed together and you're happy, just dump it on in there. Again, you want a nice thick layer. You're going to have some springtails and isopods in there, so they're going to need room to maneuver around and hold in that good humidity. That's what you want. We're placing in those big pieces first, making sure that they've got a nice comfortable home before you place in any little details. We've got 3 live plants, but you don't have to put any live plants, purely up to you. So there goes 1 and 2 up front and the little guy in the back. There are some springtails, both cow and orange, and then some isopods rather, and then little tiny springtails. We've got the waterfall feature with the cord out the back, and then there's the other half of those leaves just spread around the top so that those isopods have room to hide. This plant, one of our favorites, doesn't really stick in anywhere, so we're actually going to take it apart and then attach it to the screen top. With all of the fake plants, just put them where you want them, add in vines wherever you want. We used this really long vine and just wrapped it around those branches. Got a nice natural look out of it. Now we've got it with the screen top, the lighting and heating on. We think it looks fantastic with that curtain that we talked about. Just little tiny holes drilled into the underside. If I was a snake, this is where I would want to live.
Me too.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for our summary of how we did our custom background and bioactive substrate for Mr. Wiz Khalifa. As always, we really appreciate you.
Thank you for going with us.
And we'll catch you on the next one.
What is my part to say?